All eyes in the SEC are on Nashville, Tennessee, as the 25th ranked Vanderbilt Commodores host the Texas Longhorns in a primetime matchup at First Bank Stadium. Helping us break it all down, talk all things from the Vandy perspective, good friend of mine and good friend of the show, Billy Derrick of Vandy Sports, who does a great job covering the Commodores. Billy, what's going on, man? Appreciate you taking the time and excited to have you on once again, my friend.
What's up, Chris? I'm fired up, man. It's crazy that Vanderbilt's ranked in the top 25, especially after a season like last year, where you go 2-10, and a lot of the talk in the offseason, we talked about it, was what's Clark Lea's job security? What are the people in Nashville talking about with Clark Lee? Well, he's silenced all of those rumors, all of that discussion, and they have a top 5 Texas team coming to town, trying to bring the goalpost back to the Cumberland River again all of a sudden.
Yeah, Billy, let's start there. I mean, again, Vandy ranked 25th in the country, but let's more so talk how they've gotten there. I mean, it's out the gate, Billy. It felt like shocking the college football world in week 1, taking down Virginia Tech in overtime. Since then, obviously, you have the disappointing loss at Georgia State. You come close against Mizzou, but then really the breakthrough moment beating number 1 Alabama, which, again, you were there in person. The goalpost gets carried to the Cumberland River. One of the greatest moments, if not the greatest moment, in Vanderbilt football history. Then there's the talk of how will they follow it up. Well, you go on the road, you beat Kentucky, and then, of course, you beat Ball State last week, and you're 5-2, game away from bowl eligibility, 2-1. Diego Pavia is the talk of college football. Billy, just to this point, how can you summarize this season? Because, again, to your point, like the conversations we were having in preseason was, man, is Vandy going to hit the over-under on the win total at 2.5? Are they going to hit the over? What's the future of Clark Lee like? And now all of a sudden we're having such a different conversation. Vandy ranked for the first time in 10 years. And, again, there's real spotlight on Nashville this weekend to see if the Dores can do the quote-unquote unthinkable and pull yet another monumental upset.
Yeah, Chris, you mentioned it for Vanderbilt. They're doing non-Vandy things this year, and it started, typical Vandy. They lose that Virginia Tech game to start the season. It's a moral victory. They lose by a touchdown, and a good fight Vandy. Little old Vandy, cute Vandy. That's kind of what it sounded like. But no, they beat Virginia Tech, a Virginia Tech team that had some playoff expectations. They almost beat Miami. I still think Virginia Tech's a solid football team. Vanderbilt did not let them come into their house and beat them. And I got a text from somebody after that Virginia Tech win, and he told me point blank, I didn't even see any James Franklin teams at Vanderbilt have a win like that, where you get down. If you remember, Chris, they got down to Virginia Tech. They got up early, and then they got down a touchdown, and Tech had all the momentum, and Vanderbilt just finds a way to storm back. They tie the game with Pavia, and then they get it to overtime. Drones gets banged up a little bit there, but they win the game. And that was your first taste of what this team in this season could be. And it didn't come without its adversity. Georgia State, obviously, like Chris ended up beating Vanderbilt in Atlanta. But I think for this team, they've been resilient. And I think it starts, obviously, with Diego Pavia and what he has brought to this team. Not only has he brought his skill set, right? We know what he can do as a Johnny Manziel type player, but Clark Lee has talked all season how humble and he is, and how good of a leader he is. He's always the first guy to every meeting. I mean, he's getting up early for, before anybody even gets up and showing up at the facility. He's, the front and center with Clark Lee, in the team meetings. Like, he has fully embraced Clark Lee's message, and that's what they needed. When we've talked in the past, Chris, that Clark's message, you talked a lot about how the message is there. You like Clark Lee, and people want to support Clark Lee, and people think that, okay, if we can just get this thing rolling, get it going, Nashville will support this team. Well, I mean, you've seen it this year. I mean, to beat Alabama, number 1 Alabama. I know the Tennessee win over Alabama has maybe tainted Vanderbilt's, but it's still number 1 Alabama, and a top, still a top 10, top 15 team this year that I think still has a shot at the playoffs. So that win obviously put Vanderbilt in the upper echelon of everyone's minds. But to go to Lexington and beat Kentucky, that's another non-Vandy thing. And I think that's what got them ranked, Chris. Obviously, you beat Ball State, you hang in there, you beat them by 10. But I really do think going to Lexington and getting a win like that proved that this team is not, it's not a fluke that win over Alabama. That wasn't some one-hit wonder. Pavia has a different mentality. This offense, I think, Chris, is one of the best offenses in the SEC. I mean, it really is. And I think people have slowly realized that. And it took me a little time. Even after Virginia Tech, I said, okay, it's a good win. Let's see it in the SEC. Well, they've proven it against Alabama, Kentucky. So I'm interested to see down the stretch here what happens with this team. But we're going to get a really good indication of where they stand with the elites in the SEC, especially this weekend.
Billy, I want you to expand even more so on Diego Pavia. I mean, again, you've gotten to see him up close and personal firsthand this season, every single game. For those of us from afar, I mean, we see it as the legend of Diego Pavia just continues to grow week after week. I mean, some of the quotes he's had this year, Vandy, we turn, I mean, yeah. It's incredible. I love the attitude he's brought where, I heard an interview where his first convo with Clark Lee was, we're going to win every freaking game we play when I come to Vandy. Like, just, the comparisons of, the Johnny Manziel, like this dude, he drips swag. He's a leader. He's exactly what I feel like Vanderbilt football needed. But like getting to cover him, Billy, day in, day out, what has that been like? And just the way it feels like in such a short amount of time, he has essentially transformed Vanderbilt football. I know it's more than him, but we all know, Billy, if you don't have a quarterback, you don't have a chance. And I mean, it just seems like he was the perfect answer for what Clark Lee needed.
Well, it all started, I think, after the Virginia Tech game when it started to become fun covering him, at least for me, and I didn't have many private conversations with him leading up to the season. He had a couple availabilities before the season, but, he was a little more reserved before the season. And, there's not a ton going on, of course, in fall camp, so there wasn't much to talk about. But I remember just seeing him, with the quarterbacks in fall camp, and he looked like a walk-on. I think there was a freshman walk-on that's bigger than him, and so you look at him and you don't believe first instinct. You're like, that guy's not the size. That's not going to work. But his mentality is what separates him. I mean, it's incredible. It reminds me a lot of Tim Tebow, Chris, when he was at Florida. And that's a different skill set, but just the mentality of, I'm going to get it done. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get it done. And, whether it takes a 4th and 1 heave to Junior Sherrill against Alabama, or it takes, diving for the pylon against Virginia Tech there on a first down after a 3rd and 1, like he just does whatever it takes. And I go back to that Virginia Tech game. I had gotten tipped off before the game that someone at Virginia Tech, a staffer or somebody, had called Diego Pavia a poor man's Trace McSorley. And I was like, oh my gosh, if Vandy wins this game, I got to find a way to get him to talk about that. And I just go in the press conference after the Virginia Tech game, I go, what kind of motivation did you have heading into this game? And he goes off about, I'm sure you saw that viral quote that he had. And, he said, beat me, then you can talk. He said, somebody over there had called me a poor man's Trace McSorley. Beat me, then you can talk. It said that's what really started it for me. I'm like, okay, this is going to be fun. This is going to be fun getting quotes every week out of this guy. And they've made him available. Obviously, you've seen him on First Take hanging out with Johnny Manziel. Like, he's gone through the whole gamut. And I think he's made himself some money too in the NIL era, which is awesome for him. But it's just fun. And it's a breath of fresh air. Like, I'm sure other beat writers or analysts are able to cover guys like this, whether it's a Johnny at A&M or, but this is the personality. It's not just the player. You just like the quote heading into Alabama, only God knows who's going to win this game. Just the stones. And he believes he's going to win every single game, no matter who he's playing, because he believes in himself that much. He believes he's going to play on Sundays. I mean, he believes he's going to be drafted. So it's just that belief, Chris, and it's been fun. The stories write themselves, and the reaction shows and everything. It's just more to talk about. We didn't have this last year at Vanderbilt, and so it's just fun. I think it's rubbed off a little on Clark. I think he's a little looser, and I think a lot of the other players, CJ Taylor, a guy that obviously didn't talk a ton last year, they sound more confident. And I think that's because Pavia has rubbed off on them. And again, it's not all because of him, but Chris, I mean, look at Auburn right now, man. I think they'd love to have Diego Pavia. And same thing with Oklahoma. I mean, there's some teams that probably feel like they missed out on this guy. But yeah, it's been so fun, and I don't want it to end, to be honest.
Billy, you mentioned some of the other guys that have made big impacts. Fairly or unfairly, there's probably a lot of folks that are tuning into Vandy on Saturday for the first time this season potentially, and they know Diego Pavia, but they don't know the other pieces around him. I mean, defensively has been a big story too. Clark Lee, I think we talked about Billy in preseason. He takes over that side of the football. You know, that's been one of the best moves he ever could have made. Talk about, Billy, some of the other standouts offensively, defensively, some of the other guys that have made this thing click this year and led to a 5-2 result for the Dores.
Yeah, offensively, Eli Stowers came over from New Mexico State. And Chris, I think he's an NFL tight end. I think he's probably a day, maybe day two, probably at least day three guy. But he's big, he's physical, you know, and he's a guy that he's just wants to win. You know, him and Pavia coming in, they just want to win football games. And I think that mindset and that will to win has really helped this team. So obviously Eli Stowers, and he was a quarterback. He started as a quarterback, actually was committed to A&M, was a 4-star, highly touted guy, got hurt, ends up, you know, transferring, switching positions over at New Mexico State, and ends up turning himself into a potential NFL tight end. So he's obviously a guy to watch there. But their receivers they're not dudes. Like, they're not, you know, they don't have a Malik Neighbors or anybody like that that's going to go you could throw it up to him, go make a play. But within the offense, they do enough. You know, Junior Sherrill on that 4th and 1 there against Alabama, that's a tough catch there. I mean, that's a fingertip catch there that he ended up making. I think he's a good player. He's still young. Quincy Skinner has been there for a little bit. He's a guy that's physical, and they block really well. They have a guy, a former walk-on, Richie Hoskins, number 5, who just watch him block on the edge. I mean, that's as important of a job for those receivers as it is the offensive linemen within this offense. Their running backs are solid. They're serviceable. Cedric Alexander works really well with Pavia. He's not the biggest guy, but he catches well out of the backfield. He blocks really well, too. He was on Cole Kubelik's block party, just some of the block. It's a physical offense that this team plays with. So I would say those guys, but Stowers is the dude on offense to watch. He's their go-to safety blanket guy. Defensively is where it gets interesting. Randon Fontenette, number 2, plays the star position, which, you know, some people call it the anchor, but Vanderbilt, I think, is calling it the star this season, where you remember Kyle Hamilton at Notre Dame under Clark Lee just roams. You know, he'll be on a receiver one play, and then he'll come in on a blitz one play, and then he'll play safety the next play. He'll make a tackle in the backfield. Like, he's everywhere, and he's a big physical. He's an SEC type player that Vanderbilt typically doesn't have or doesn't get, at least recently. They just haven't been able to get dudes like that. CJ Taylor, a veteran, number 1, of course. Chris, if you know, he's been there a long time. Langston Patterson is a big guy to watch this week. He should be back. He's been out the last couple of weeks. Local kid, just kind of a grinder, really, really smart, physical player. Their linebackers are good. On the edge, Miles Capers should be back this week. He was hurt in that Kentucky game. Went to the hospital on a stretcher, actually, but he was able to come back on the field, so he'll be back. But a guy from Purdue, Corday Sender, has been really active off the edge too. So those would be the guys defensively, and they've got really good special teams too, Chris. Their kicker and punter, Brock Taylor, I want to say, is something like 11 of 14 on the season. He's missed some big kicks. He missed the one at Missouri, but he's also hit 4 50-yarders. So they're sound. It's a sound football team. They don't beat themselves. But it starts with Pavia on offense. Stowers is his weapon. And then defensively, I'd look at CJ Taylor and Fontenette, number 1 and number 2, guys that just fly around.
Billy, you and I talked before we just off air, if you will, about the buzz around the city of Nashville. Can you let the folks know? I mean, what is the vibe like? I mean, again, this team in the top 25 for the first time in a decade. You mentioned, I'm glad you went into detail, Billy, because I think you say all what you said. This team is not a fluke. This is a good football team. Like, Clark Lee has assembled a good football team. They haven't fluked their way into anything. What is the energy and the electricity like now with Texas coming to town? Again, all eyes are on the city. You've got this, midday sort of primetime matchup. I mean, it's people are paying attention in Nashville, Tennessee, and there's a great opportunity that lies ahead. What's the buzz around the city been like this week?
I think it's the biggest game, the biggest buildup to a game since Alabama. Now, I know they had game day in 2008, but that Alabama buildup when they started the season 2-0, coming off a win against K-State, was pretty big. I want to say SEC Nation was in town, and Vanderbilt had some hope. You know, you thought you had a good quarterback in Kyle Shermer and some weapons and around him, but that season turned into a disaster. And we saw what Nephi Lielo did after the game, the K-State game, and that didn't work out. Vanderbilt lost 59-0. I just think this year the buildup is because of what this team has done. I mean, they've beaten Virginia Tech. They beat Alabama, and you saw all the aftermath of that. And then you go on the road and beat Kentucky and Lexington, which I think, Chris, was probably the hardest game on their schedule to come back 6 days later after the biggest win in school history and beat Kentucky. That I think a lot of the hype is it's not exterior. It's not because Texas is coming in. It's not because you got Ewers and Manning and all that talent. It's because of what this team has done. It's about Vanderbilt for once. I mean, how many times, Chris, have we've talked about games, or you've previewed games, and you talk 10 minutes about one team and 2 or 3 about Vandy. Now you're forced to split it evenly and give Vandy the respect you have to. I mean, they've got players that people want to talk about in Diego Pavia, and I think it obviously starts with him, but he's been really integral. He's taking a lot of classes. I think he's taken classes with a lot of freshmen, and this freshman class at Vanderbilt has really bought in. The students are all in on this team with Pavia. And he actually put a tweet out yesterday because there was a story that was written by one of the student writers, and it was released yesterday. She basically put out there that Vanderbilt's administration, their police officers are not letting students stay in their seats, keep their seats. If they want water, if they want to go to the bathroom, they can't come back to their seat, which is pretty dumb. But it's not a big student section. Pavia put a tweet out yesterday. Let's do it. He put to the chancellor. He said, let's extend that student section. Let's make it bigger. Let's, Vandy, we turn, like you said. So it's just, he's just like, he's a character, man. And so I think he has infiltrated the city, his family. He had almost 70 family members at the Alabama game. I stopped by their family tailgate. They bought a DJ for the parent tailgate there. It's different, man. You don't see this every day. And I think, honestly, there'll probably be a 30 for 30 written on the Pavia family experience at Vandy. I mean, they travel to every road game. They'll obviously be here, but he'll tell stories about his brothers. They got in Thursday before the Alabama game and partied every night. I think they left Monday night. It's just, they're having fun. This team's having fun, and it starts with Pavia, but there is a buzz. And I think a lot of that too, the Titans are losing. The Preds have an 0-5 start. And a lot of the talk, the last several years was Vandy's not as important to people in Nashville as the music scene and the Titans and the Preds. But now it's fun. You've got a reason to go to the game, Chris. And so I think that's what's separating it. And for this week, they wanted game day, they wanted at least SEC Nation. I don't know how they didn't get SEC Nation. I'm a little confused by that. I thought they deserved the 2:30 ABC slot as well, but Alabama and Missouri, takes that. So good for them. But anyway, Chris, I think it's just special. This hasn't happened, this type of buzz, since probably 2008. But the buildup is what's going to be fun, and we'll see what happens.
Billy, looking at the Texas Longhorns, what do you see from them? Obviously, coming off that loss to Georgia, it seemed like the college football world was all on Texas, and I think Georgia reminded us of who they are and why they're considered the creme de la creme when it comes to the top of this sport. But when you look at Texas, areas that you think Vanderbilt can take advantage of and can exploit, and then areas obviously that maybe concern you a little bit. Texas still obviously one of the best teams in college football and going to be a tall task this weekend.
They lost T'Vondre Sweat, Byron Murphy. They're right up the middle of that defense. And I think we're seeing, especially after that Georgia loss. Now it's Georgia, right? They've got a great offensive line. They've got Trevor Etienne at running back there, but it's not like they dropped back Carson Beck and threw the ball 50 times. I mean, he had didn't even have 200 passing yards. He threw 3 picks. Is it Georgia? I don't think Georgia they played well, Chris, right? But I think Georgia showed, okay, you can establish something on this Texas defense. So I think if Vanderbilt, honestly, this might sound dumb, I think attacking the middle of that defense. Attack the middle of that defense, and then on the outside, you got to win your one-on-one battles. That's what Vanderbilt did. They started with Cedric Alexander up the middle of that first touchdown drive against Alabama. Pavia would roll out, found Stowers a couple of times. They just got to I think they can bring the same game plan they did against Alabama. Now, I think Texas's defense, Chris, is better than Alabama's, and they've got more athletes. But I did see where Andrew Makuba could be out for this game, which I think that one of their best corners, an NFL type prospect. So I think if Vanderbilt can win their one-on-one battles and take advantage of the holes in the middle of that defense. And again, this is Texas; they've got talent, right? I'm not saying they're a liability in the middle of their defense, but I didn't come away from that Georgia game saying, good luck, Vandy, running game. I'm saying, okay, I think you can attack that. I think you can find some space there and then win your one-on-one battles. I think the margin for error in this game is going to be a lot smaller than it was in the Alabama game. And, of course, defensively for Vanderbilt, you got to find a way to frustrate Ewers. That's where I'm scared if I'm Vanderbilt. Texas and their offense is better than Alabama. I mean, they're more balanced. They can run the ball. But Ewers, you saw, you can frustrate him. So, again, I think Clark Lee and that defense, if they play well enough, can keep them in the game because the offense will put up points. They got to score touchdowns, Chris. But I think more of the pressure's on the defense with Isaiah Bond and, all those guys they've got, on that offense. But that defense is pretty scary too. So they've got some talent. I think, again, offensively, that's the key. If Vanderbilt can establish a running game in the middle of that Texas defense and then win your one-on-ones, I think Vanderbilt can have a chance. You got to take care of the football. They've only got 2 turnovers, Chris, this year, which is crazy through 7 weeks, 8 weeks. So they got to keep doing that as well. And Pavia really hasn't had an awful game. Against Ball State, he was okay. But I mean, he's come up big pretty much every week. So I think it's similar game plan to Alabama, but the margin's smaller. So when you get your chances, they had some big drops against Alabama. You got to catch everything. You got no fumbles. You got to make the tackles when you got them. And I think we'll see what happens Saturday. But again, I think middle of that defense is where Vanderbilt needs to attack.
Billy, you segue me into my next question. Key or keys to the game in your mind? Is there a specific thing or two that Vandy just has to do to pull off yet another monumental upset?
I think, Chris, they've done a really good job mentality-wise of, for these hyped-up home games, whether it's Virginia Tech or Alabama, just staying focused. And obviously, maybe it's helped that they haven't had full support in the stadium. I mean, Virginia Tech had probably 70% at least of the fans there. Alabama probably upwards of 80-85%. There was a lot of Bammers in there. But I think they take that, they carry that chip on their shoulder when that happens. And they've taken that and said, okay, let's put our fans back in the stadium. They've taken pride in that. I think they just got to, in terms of a key, don't lose the chip. You can't. I thought they lost it a little bit last week, but you should have the motivation here. Not many people are going to pick you to win this game. You still got your detractors. Don't lose the chip. So that would be the big thing for me. But also Pavia's got to be Pavia. You saw against Alabama, played the game of his life, Chris. I mean, the kid just went out there. He 80% completion. Like he made every big play. I think he's going to have to do that and maybe play better, which, I just think that's what it's going to take. So again, they can't lose their chip on their shoulder. I'm not saying they will, but there's also a little more pressure on Pavia to find another play to make, find a new, trick out of the bag that you can throw at Texas. I think they'll have some tricks up their sleeve, but does Texas just bully them a little bit? Does it get to a point where they can't run their stuff? Do they get into the backfield so quick that Vanderbilt gets frustrated? They're going to have to make some big time halftime adjustments, I think, in this game, but survive the first Texas plunge, that first surge from Tech. They're going to try to jump on Vandy. I think that's probably Sark's plan here. Jump on Vandy early, get the few fans they may have in the stadium out of the game, see what happens. But so I think they need I'll say survive that first Texas surge, and then Pavia's got to be Pavia. and maybe Pavia times 2. Like, we need to see an even better Pavia if Vandy wants to beat Texas.
Billy, Derrick, Vandy Sports does a great job covering the Dores. Billy, last thing before I get you out of here, it's very well known at this point, the SEC Unfiltered Tour is headed to Nashville. As someone who's never been to a Vanderbilt game, I've been to Nashville once before, as you and I were talking for SEC Media Days a few years ago, but never been to Lot 2, never been to First Bank Stadium. Just give me an idea of what I'm in store for here.
Well, the guys over at the Doorport, Will Byram, Trevor Hewlin, they'll have you covered. Okay, they'll be up 6 a.m. You know, it's a 3:15 start. They'll have you covered over there, and shoot me a text if you need help finding that location. But no, it's fun. It's a good time. I think that's something that has improved. You know, Vanderbilt's younger fan base, you know, just having fun and gearing up for games, and so they've done a really good job of that. But you know, this year I'll admit it, there's a construction everywhere. But Vanderbilt has found a way to maintain their tailgate locations, and everything is still pretty much the same. But the students are going to show up. That's the thing. I think just walking around game days this year, there's a different feel because it feels like the whole school is invested. And you know, Chris, when you get your whole school invested into your football program, that's when you start to build something special. I know Vanderbilt's not the biggest school, but you know, and even there's schools around, whether it's Lipscomb or Belmont. I mean, you got kids in Nashville. You got people that want to come to Vanderbilt. I've gotten a text from a couple of people saying, "Hey, let me know if you got extras." I'm getting the old extra text, you know. So that's how you know, Chris. And no, just let me know when you get there. I'll hook you up with the Doorport guys. Lot 2. If you got any other SEC fans in town or anybody looking for a tailgate, Lot 2 there is the place to be.
Lot 2, the spot to be. Billy, always a pleasure, man. Appreciate you taking the time and hope to link up with you this weekend, my friend.
Thanks, Chris. See you Saturday.